are back on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. As we approach the end of the year, this should be a time for a rational society to be talking about how it is going to meet its basic needs, its essential needs for the year to come, and how well it is done in the year that is about to end. That is not, however, what is obsessing our lawmakers, either in Washington, D.C., or in the home state of my next guest, West Virginia. Troy Miller is not only the executive producer of the Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, he is also West Virginia organizer for Social Security Works, and he is very active in West Virginia Democratic Party politics. And he joins us once again, not only as producer, but as guest to talk about the state of affairs at the end of the year. So first of all, Troy Miller, welcome back to our program.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's always a pleasure to be here with you and our audience. And hi.
Yeah, hi. Now, you are, as I mentioned in my intro, you're obviously based in West Virginia activist. I see that the story as a pivoting, maybe as a taking off point for us, that you sent me, the National Guard in jails, not sustainable, corrections official says the West Virginia Division of Corrections and Rehabilitation can't sustain the cost of using West Virginia National Guard members to work as corrections officers amid a shortage of staff. At the same time, the budget situation in West Virginia is what? Are they out of money? They can't afford to operate their jails? What's going on?
Well, it depends who you ask, because for a little bit of background for the listeners, West Virginia has now gone full. For all intents and purposes, a one-party state run by the Republican Party in this state. This has been largely true for the last couple of elections, but now with November and in West Virginia, we had a lower Gen Z turnout than the rest of the country. Everywhere else, basically, where things went for Democrats or for progressives, or things went against Republicans, let's say, it was Gen Z turnout. We did not have that in West Virginia. So the Republicans they've been trying to spend this quote unquote budget surplus down for years. And so a lot of it is American Rescue Plan funds. Some of it's COVID relief stuff that I think some of it has now just evaporated because it wasn't spent in time. And so they keep on saying, we have this budget surplus, we have all of this money here, and we should give it back to the West Virginians. We should make sure that we put money back in West Virginians' pockets, which is nominally a great idea. I'd love that. The methods of doing this are generally by, repealing by giving a flat tax cut to everyone, which is a regressive tax cut. You and I and most of the audience knows, I'm sure. Or reducing property taxes, which helps people with property. If you're mostly with debt and don't own a car, or own a car that's so old that it's no longer being taxed in West Virginia, that doesn't help you at all. So all of this is predicated on this idea, though, that there's a budget surplus, which if we're looking at the shortage of guards in our jails, the staff shortages, not just there, but across departments in West Virginia, and I would argue intentionally so. When Republicans get control of a state, they tend to gut services. That's kind of their raison d'etre. And so we're bringing in National Guard to fund this, and all the while they're going, we have this budget surplus. And I make the case to you in this audience that you can't have a budget surplus if you're not meeting your basic needs. And we can have a deeper conversation about the role that prisons and jails play in our society and whether we should be staffing them or treating them the way we are. But we can commonly agree that right now we are understaffed, right? That's not the report from the lobbying groups on behalf of the prison guards or anything. This is just the matter of fact. There aren't enough people in there to keep people safe, the guards or the general population. This doubles over when you look at our foster care system, right? This is not in a state that I would say is fully funded and delivering services as needed, And so I don't think, I think it's a surplus in the way that if I just stopped buying food for my family, and then I look at what's left over at the end of the month and I say, I have a surplus. Well, yeah, but I've also starved my kids.
Right. Right.
There is no surplus here.
Right. I mean, there are actually, it's a great story to start with, Troy, because there are actually three pieces of it, right? And looking at this Charleston Gazette Mail text, or tweet rather, first of all, it says the Division of Corrections doesn't have the budget to use National Guard members as corrections officers, meaning exactly what you just said. Well, how can you have a surplus when you're not performing what you've deemed are the basic functions of the state? So there's that, which you brought up. There's the issue of a carceral state or whatever, which is implicit in this, but a separate issue. But then there's a third, and just to throw it out there, and that's amid a shortage of staff, whether you're the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Charleston Gazette Mail, this whole phrase shortage of staff is thrown around as if like there just aren't enough humans in West Virginia, or who might move to West Virginia, or is it something else, such as the pay is lousy,
right,
and the work hard, and you don't have a shortage of staff sounds like an act of nature. It's more like because we don't pay enough, we're forcing the National Guard to do this job because we don't want to pay enough, and now we can't afford to have the National Guard do it at the same time that politicians in the state capitol are saying, we have a surplus.
Yeah. I mean, right? These are the people, the Republicans, right, we have a share of Paul Ryan types of Republicans in West Virginia, too. Everyone makes it out to be Trumpistan, and there is certainly this sort of fascistic faction of Republicans, that no doubt. But there's also these people who pride themselves as being the rational economic types who are going to use the market and find the market's optimum and all this. And they seem to really they love that line right up until it's time for a labor shortage, in which case classical economics tells us that if there's a shortage of labor, then wages, the price of labor, should go up until there is no longer a shortage of labor, unless you're dealing with the real constraints, right? In the Stephanie Kelton modern monetary theory world, where you actually run out of people, you've hit full employment, nobody can work extra jobs, right? But that's not what's happening here. Unemployment is relatively stable in West Virginia right now. There's a cyclical nature to things, but it's a similar sort of problem where we have, I would argue, relatively high unemployment, but because of all the various gaming of part-time jobs, gig work, the various ways that we don't measure these things well, and because whoever is in charge uses these numbers to celebrate themselves no matter what, right?
And I would guess, I'm sorry to interrupt, Troy, but
go right ahead.
I would guess, I don't know if I'm right or not, my guess would be that West Virginia has a fairly low workforce participation rate, that you've got a lot of people in West Virginia who have kind of working age who are no longer job seeking and therefore don't appear. Do you happen to know the answer to that?
It is fair to say that, there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of work that's done that's essentially black market work, right? That is that's either cash on hand and labor like that. There's a lot to be, and then there's a lot of care worker work and things like this. Healthcare is one of the largest employment sectors in the state, if not the largest, off the top of my head. But we also, with I believe the jail guards and all of this, I think they're part of the Public Employees Insurance Agency, which has been dramatically underfunded and not having not meeting the goals that it really needs to lay out. And so people continue to see their premiums go up. This is what spurred the teacher strike back in 2018, if people will recall, is that
yes, absolutely,
wages were not keeping pace with the Public Employees Insurance Agency. That's still the case. So again, for Republicans to hold up a number and say, this is how much money we have sitting here that's extra, that's surplus, right? That's literally what they mean. It's surplus, it's extra. And have all of this unfunded stuff. And someone was arguing with me today that, well, government is insatiable. And so you have to just stop feeding it at some point. And I had to go like, but we're not talking about a theoretical increase in paying services. We're talking about fulfilling the services that are essential functions of the state, right? And again, we can have the conversation about what role the carceral system should play in our state, in both the conceptual state and the literal state of West Virginia. But we can't deny, no matter what, on any side of philosophical conversation there, that the system we have right now is underfunded, understaffed, and is not able to meet the goals that it has set out for itself. And that's not some theoretical government is insatiable bureaucratic problem, right? And I'm a realist. I can fully accept, as you can too, bureaucratic systems do. They really want to continue to exist. And so every year they will construct budgets that justify their existence, which brings me to where I think kind of the biggest picture of this whole thing is the conversation that we need to be having at every level of government is that budgets are moral documents. These are, and it doesn't matter whether you're a faithful person or you're a religious person or anything like this. You can have conversations and understand the reality of a more moral document, of a moral process, without having to accept any person's version of morality. All you have to accept is that we are making priorities with a budget. And when we make priorities, when we make economic decisions, when we make base assumptions in economics, these are moral assumptions, right? If we assume that it is a natural good that growth occur in all circumstances, that is a moral judgment that says that it is bad if we are to shrink. Now, if we say, on the other hand, that it's bad to exist outside of a system's constraints, that is also a moral judgment that says it is good to stay within the constraints of a system. I'm kind of going off into the weeds here, but I think it's very important to understand that how we spend our money and how we decide as a city, as a state, as a county, as a nation, whether we're going to expand the child tax credit or buy another F-35, that's a moral decision we're making every time we pass these bills. And
I would add to that,
please,
that while your elected officials are bragging about the unemployment rate in that state, the fact is, I did a little multitasking here. West Virginia has the second lowest workforce participation rate of any state in the country. The only state worse off is Mississippi. And it has let's see, looking at it, it was 54.9% in 2020, which was the lowest of all states. It bumped up a little bit, but basically it's either the worst state or the second worst state in the country, depending on, it moves from slot to slot. It's right at the bottom when it comes, in other words, nearly half of the working age people in West Virginia have given up on ever finding a job. And that is significantly more than you see in the rest of the country. We can talk about, one of the things that corrections work, jails and prisons. You take my hometown of Utica, New York, which has some kind of certain economic and demographic resemblance to West Virginia in some ways. They built, prisons in Oneida County there. Some would argue for the same reason some prisons have been built in places like West Virginia, which is to give people jobs, but they don't pay enough. to get people out of the workforce to take them at the same time that the state is, actually the real unemployment rate is extremely high. So people are experiencing this economic misery. Seems like the politicians in your state have determined the state has so much excess money, it can give it back to rich people. Am I fair or unfair in my summarization there?
I think that's all completely fair, especially, and going right down to, I think Utica and Oneida County are very similar to places in West Virginia, and I think it's served the elite in this state a whole lot to try to act like West Virginia is totally unique, as though Western Maryland doesn't look like West Virginia, as though Western Massachusetts doesn't look like West Virginia, as though upstate New York, large parts of it don't look exactly like places in West Virginia, and northern Mississippi just the same. The only thing that I would say you might be being a little overly fair about is, I would say that the whole thing is that we're dealing with people who hold up a version of the Bible and a version of Christianity that is predicated more on the words of Paul and those who won't work won't eat. This whole idea of Christianity and the idea that there are no deserving poor, because if you're poor, that's with Julia Black last week, we were talking about the secular Calvinism. Well, actual Calvinism is alive and well here in the state politics too. And so they, and this I think is why it feeds so programmatically into fascism over time. They essentially see these people as less than human. If people aren't willing to get up and go out and get a job, right, then they're not really deserving of anything from the government anyway. The people who are really deserving of getting their money back from the government are the people who pay substantial sums in, right? They have no concept of the rights of the dignity of man, of the dignity of an individual, inherent in the individual. And I think sometimes we as small d Democrats and progressives kind of forget this, that we're dealing with people who really do look at trans individuals and see someone who is less than human. Not just who is scary, but somebody who is less than human. No different than the way that in the 1950s, when you look back at the pictures of the nice, educated white women standing there screaming at a black child walking into a recently desegregated school, or at a lunch counter or something like this. They saw those black people as less than human. And we should not we can be as tolerant and understanding of the other side as we want, but we should not forget that this is the basis of fascistic thought, and this sort of, it comes, it's not too far removed from the hyper-Catholic and Jesuit at the time of the 17th century and all this idea that you have to save the savages, right? And the heathens cannot be saved without the word of God. And if they're going to turn away from it, that's on them, but you have to. And the extension of that into this modern era is that if people are not willing to denigrate themselves, are not willing to... this concept of quiet quitting, which is really just people only doing what they're being paid to do and contracted to do, not going above and beyond. Well, the idea then is, if you just do that, if you're just doing what's being asked of you, and you don't fully grovel to lick the boots of the powers that be, to use the parlance of our internet speak these days, then you're not really deserving of it, And
let me ask you this:
you're not born into a good family, good genes, right? All of this. Sorry, Richard, I could go on all day, so go ahead, please.
Let me ask you this, though, because this fascinates me about places like Utica and West Virginia, particularly among white voters. You have this, a lot of these people, I think it's sometimes exaggerated and misunderstood, but I think a lot of these people vote for this philosophy because somehow they think it doesn't apply to them. As you know, most people on welfare are white, not black. But even people on welfare, white people on welfare, for example, might vote for a philosophy that denigrates people on welfare because they think that means those others, right? But I'm fascinated that say like West Virginia, it used to be reliably Democratic, now solidly Republican. That I think the other flip side, like what you were saying about trans kids or whatever, that they know their life stinks. They know their life is not everybody, obviously, but people who are struggling. They know things are getting worse. They don't think anybody cares. So they think, well, Democrats only care about people that are different from me, and they don't care about me. And Republicans, at least they understand that you have to work to get ahead. And it's what the Brazilian Marxist educator Paulo Freire called internalizing the oppressor consciousness. Right. That they think, well, I'm not like these other people on welfare because any day now I'm going to get out there and make something. I mean, or something else is going on. I don't know, but there's some way that they think that, however, poor or exploited or hopeless they may be, that they're not deserving of the help, or you get what I'm driving at, right?
Right. And there's I think you talked about this with Amy Jo Hutchison a number of weeks ago, a month or so ago. And there's a certain poverty has a shame aspect to it, so closely tied to it in America, especially. And I mean, I think worldwide, culturally, but in our American culture, especially with the Protestant work ethic and all of this so ingrained into so much of our policy and our society. But with that comes then the pride of not being poor. And I think there's a certain aspect where our society has allowed people to define poverty not by how desperate of a situation they might be in, not by whether they are one emergency bill away from being homeless or something like this. It's more, I think we've convinced people of a consumer aspect of it, where if you can have an iPhone, for instance, then you're not really as poor as and we, by the same token, this is all an extension of, after the Civil War and after, slaves were freed, you all of a sudden had freed black people walking around the same streets as the people who were hired to keep them in line in the fields and to keep them working. And all of a sudden the poor whites have to try to figure out what the difference is, how are they any different? And so you immediately start seeing laws go into place and the midnight terror rides of the KKK and all of this to ensure that it was worse to be black and freed in the South than it was to be poor and white in the South. And we're still seeing a lot of that today. And one of the things I'd really like to see, and I'll continue to work on, and I know it's tangential to a lot of the work you do too, but I'd like to see us to be able to build an urban and rural alliance to understand that what happens, our home studio is We Act Radio, and neither of us are there right now, but we do broadcasts from there, and it is still our flagship station. It's in Anacostia, Washington, D.C., east of the river. Most people who will go to Washington, D.C. to visit it will never know it because it's not somewhere you're supposed to go. I believe that the French embassy years ago had warned people of going over there if you were a tourist because it's so dangerous and crime rate and then all this. But it's not that different from choose your rundown trailer park here in West Virginia. The people's issues are the same and the people's despair are the same. And the reason you're going to find fentanyl around those communities is the same. Our society has failed to provide meaningful existence for a lot of these people, and we act as though making sure that they won't starve to death in their poverty or that they won't die of a preventable illness in their poverty is somehow giving them a handout. It's sick, and it goes right back to what I was saying before about these budgets being moral documents. The fact that I'm having to present this to seem reasonable as like our prisons are short funded, right? And that's the end that I kind of feel like I have to use to get Republicans to understand what I'm talking about when I say there is no budget surplus here. is really ridiculous. I mean, we should be able to talk about the food insecurity in West Virginia and say, if we have one food insecure child in West Virginia, we cannot possibly have a budget surplus, because we could spend that money to keep that child. If there is a school lunch that is unpaid in West Virginia because of poverty, then we don't have a budget surplus. But we are not even at a place in our society where we can have those conversations, really. We have to be able to start with, well, the military or the police or the prisons are underfunded, because that's what real cold calculating politicians, that's what the Machiavellian types would really choose. That's the real world politics, right? Everything else is lovey-dovey, hopey-changey stuff. I don't know. I don't think feeding infants is lovey-dovey, hopey-changey stuff. I think that's the base expectation of a society that claims to be wealthy in any way.
No, of course, but I mean, you're up against it, Troy Miller, in West Virginia, as we all are in our various ways. But how can a Democratic Party even conceive of trying to make it back into power in a state like West Virginia? I think the elitist, sort of centrist wing of the Democratic Party doesn't have a prayer, but how do you build a Democratic, or for that matter, any party that can challenge this sort of hegemony of Republicans with something that says, look, you deserve help, your neighbor deserves help, we should be helping each other, the government can be part of that. Here's how we do it. I mean, is there any way forward at all in your estimation?
It's a big question. It's the question that, well, I was about to say it's the $10 million question or whatever, but it's really the question that people's lives will depend on here in the future. And so the answer is, very seriously, we need to get organized. We need to choose messaging that is no-brainer messaging. I shouldn't use that term, ableist language there, no-brainer. But in any case, we need what I'm going to spend much of the next few years, if not the rest of my life, fighting for, is a Democratic Party that can organize around disability issues here in West Virginia, that can organize around Social Security, and seriously, and take the Republicans to task about what this means to guarantee Social Security, to fight for lower prescription drug prices, and to make sure that at least municipal employees, even start at the very small level, aren't going broke because they can't afford the prescription drug prices. We need to take it directly to the people. We need to, again, I will reference Amy Jo Hutchison. It was on a month or two ago. We need to stop asking organizers, where are the poor people? And we need to go and actually talk to them and organize them. And because organizing can't happen from the top down in that way, no matter how much people want it to, we need to go to these communities and help them organize themselves to the best of our ability, without the white saviorism or rich saviorism or elitist saviorism or whatever one, right? But we need to make sure that we're constantly going to these communities. Right now, as we record this, I don't know if anyone hears that sound. That's the sound of donors pulling their money out of West Virginia because Raphael Warnock won the Senate race. And that's great. I'm really happy that Joe Manchin is less relevant. It's a weird thing to say that I'm happy my senator is less relevant. But that is a whole lot of groups who have once again disappointed communities and left organizers out to hang, because they are not here for the long haul, and they've chosen not to be here for the long haul. And this is why people are disaffected here in West Virginia, why people aren't turning. It's not just that they aren't voting for Democrats, it's that we're seeing some of the lowest voter turnouts in this state's history, or in the last 150 years, right? In these recent elections, because people just aren't, there's the voter suppression and all of this with it too. But there's also just disaffection.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
People who aren't participating in the labor force also aren't participating in electoral politics, and there's a lot of work to be cut out here, and a lot of it is going to be very simply community building. That's what I see when we look across the urban and rural centers, and we look anywhere in America, where the places that are most susceptible to fascism, and this is across the world too, are the places where people are loneliest and most isolated. And that is what we have to. That's what something that every one of us can do in our own states, our own cities, our own towns, is trying to build the community and understanding, not sneering at faith communities. I just want to say, because what we seem to miss so much of I'll speak as a Democrat, as a registered Democrat, and as an organizer in Democrat, and all this stuff. But on the left in general, is that churches and faith communities are some of the last places where people have any community in America. And we need to be able to approach those communities and engage those communities without sneering at them. And at the same time, let's try to find some other communities we could build and we can be a part of, and we invite people into that are. I don't know. I could just keep on kind of talking in circles around here, and as I'm going,
you're not talking in circles.
It's a perfect Christmas perfect
right.
holiday message here.
And you have a red sweatshirt on, so you're in the holiday spirit.
It's either that or my Star Trek red shirt.
Well, Star Trek's fine with me, but you might alienate the Star Wars contingent. I understand that's a very bitter fan beef, but no, I totally hear you, and I hear you about churches, and they are places where even if it's only within the community, communal values or practice, people care about each other and so on. So there are a lot of institutions and social groups to build on, and it means the rest of us stepping outside of our perhaps out of our comfort zones, meeting people where they are. So you're doing great work there in West Virginia. I really appreciate it. Again, Troy Miller, West Virginia organizer for Social Security Works and executive producer of the 0 Hour. Thanks for that great work, and thanks for coming back on the show.
My pleasure, my honor every time, Richard, and I will see you after the music.
Yes, you will. And we will play that music and be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and you're listening to the 0 Hour.